Project Nigel, a rather well-known Rover 25. Or is he a Rover 25? The badging would suggest otherwise. So what exactly is this car? Well, on one hand, he is a 2003 Rover 25 impression. In another sense, he is perhaps the ultimate survivor. Some have argued that he's a work of art, but what he most definitely is the expression of one man's weirdness. Or should that be eccentricity? Or should it be genius? Perhaps it or he is all of these things. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Project Nigel. A number of years ago, this car was a very humble couple of £100 buy for Paul Roverman, aka Captain Mustard. He used the car for a while and subsequently sold it. At some point the car was re-offered for sale and he bought it back. Further down the line he saw that the car was being potentially offered for scrap. So once again he bought it back, and this time he kept it. By this point the car was cosmetically somewhat challenged, although fundamentally okay. It acquired an MOT without too much difficulty. And working with a budget of approximately nothing, he decided that he would start trying to improve this little car. And that meant using bits of other little cars that were lying around in his yard. And they weren't always the correct colour, harvest gold. And gradually, piece by piece, the car began to acquire its character. Let's have a look at some of those pieces, shall we? Being a relatively humble model, the car would probably have started life on 14-inch steel wheels, possibly with wheel trims, although they might have disappeared by the wayside. But then, at some point, a set of 16-inch Rover 45 alloys made their way onto Nigel, as did some chrome mirror caps, an MGZR roof spoiler, and a silly hat, Lexus-style rear taillights, a slightly reworked model number, and this is of course homage to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. On one side, and one side only, Streetwise rubbing strips. And the Streetwise influence didn't end there. He also acquired some very non-standard roof bars, front fog lights, and the bewildering but ultimately entrancing and enchanting variety of differently coloured panels, as can be seen. What all of the panels do have in common is that each one was an improvement on the panel which it replaced, and each one came from a budget of, let's remember this, approximately bugger all. Things changed inside the car too. A leather interior found its way inside Nigel. The gear lever gator turned itself inside out, overnight, all on its own. A steering wheel migrated from an MGF and donated its services. Mechanical issues were also addressed as and when needed. A de-restricted throttle body was fitted to the 1.4 litre K-Series engine. The head gasket was replaced and upgraded. And the car became really well known within the Rover community and became a feature of the classic car show circuit. But that's not all. even more fame and fortune beckoned for Nigel here, because Captain Mustard had the idea of starting a YouTube channel based around him. You might know it. Other YouTubers picked up on this extraordinary, oh, is it fair to call it a vehicle, or is it something more? This extraordinary presence. And the car featured on such luminary channels as JM on Cars and Furious Driving. Now, the car is on loan to me and is spending a few days with me here in the Peak District. So let's do a bit less talking and a little more driving. Let's get Nigel out onto those Peak District roads. Well, here we are driving through the Peak District National Park in Nigel, and the first thing I'm going to try is a wiper test a la Hubnut. Here we go, let's see. Oh dear me. Oh my gosh. Oh well, I mean, goodness, that has to go down as somewhat disappointing. The washer jets to the left, as I look at them, are pointed skywards. They are washing not the windscreen, but some unknown object of attack somewhere above us. Let me show you that again, and look at the left-hand washer jet. Very much shooting for the moon there, whereas the right-hand washer jets barely make it onto the windscreen at all, look. So, very difficult to, the wiper blades seem to be perfectly okay and functional, but, and so I'm sure that in terms of cleaning rain from the windscreen, Nigel would be most efficacious, but in actually washing a dirty windscreen, I think we have to give Nigel 3 out of 10, and that's generous. Now, as we drive through the beautiful Peak District village of Stony Middleton, let me remind you that Nigel is fitted with the 1.4 K-Series engine, and in my mind that is very much the pick of the K-Series bunch. It's a fantastic little unit, willing, loves to rev, really quite peppy once you get into the upper echelon of the rev range, and above all, incredibly frugal. And it's on these roads, these kind of roads, where the little 1.4 K series really excels, and so does the car. Here we go, time to give Nigel some right hoof. Whoa! I have to say, the steering isn't just good by Rover standards. This steering is good by any standards. Incredibly direct, excellent feel, just exactly what you want in a car that you drive to have a little bit of fun. The temptation is always to take corners just that little bit quicker than you would in any other car, just for shits and giggles and a bit of satisfaction. This is fantastic. Now, of course, the one thing that Nigel and other 1.4K series doesn't have is torque. So you do need to put in some good work with the left arm to make sure that the engine is unsung all the time by being in the right gear at the right time. But for any enthusiastic driver, well, that's part of the fun. To me, this is Nigel in his natural environment, on a fantastic road, on a beautiful summer's day, having fun. Isn't that fabulous? On a basic motor vehicle basis, which kind of isn't really what Nigel is about, but we ought to mention it. The clutch is biting pretty much at the highest point. Now, Mustard tells me that that's just how it is. Personally, I think it's on its last legs. The steering, as I've mentioned, is fantastic. The gear change is unremarkable, but perfectly acceptable. And the brakes do their job as they should. Fortunately. Whee! Now, of course, all Rover 25s handle very well because they feature the suspension setup from the sportier versions of the 200s. So that would be the VI, the GTI, the BRM, and so on. And that suspension design was actually designed by Ruth Maddock, and it's somewhat unfair that she is better remembered now for playing the role of Gladys Pugh in the television series Hi-de-Hi than for her very important automotive work. Anybody who drives and enjoys a Rover 25 has got a lot to thank Ruth Maddock for. Hi-de-Hi. Although it must be said that by fitting the 16-inch alloy wheels, which are actually off a Rover 45, 16-inch wheels were never specified to a 25. The ride has been, well, shall we say compromised, or shall we say absolutely ruined? It becomes crashy and quite unpleasant, rather than the original, which is supple, compliant and enjoyable. Nonetheless, this is a car that you might well drive just because it puts a smile on your face, as does that view. And of course, in the case of this exact car, Project Nigel, it puts a smile on a lot of other people's faces as well. This is a car that will turn heads and will attract smiles. If you are a man driving this car around town, I would imagine that you would get a lot of sex. So, what is Nigel like as a motorway car? Well, to find out, I brought him here to the UK's first motorway, the M1, here in Greater Manchester. Okay, well, I'm travelling at an indicated 70 miles an hour. There's quite a bit of road noise, a fair bit of wind noise, and there's a bit of engine noise as we're sitting at over 3,000 RPM. Now, obviously the car wasn't designed specifically as a long-distance refined motorway tourer, but you could use it for long motorway trips without too much of a problem. It would be doable, it's not too unpleasant, though there's no question that the twisty A roads are a lot more suited to the character and a lot more fun. Fun. That word seems to be coming up a lot when we talk about this car, doesn't it? And that's no coincidence. And finally we come to the interior of the car. Now, given that Mustard is so particular about the exterior and spends hours and hours and hours detailing the paintwork and so on to the nth degree to make the car look fabulous, you might expect a similar attention of detail being given to the interior, but you would be disappointed. In fact, the interior of the car is very similar to the owner. It's somewhat shabby and unkempt. There's missing trim all over the place.
Alright, stop that shit now.
Speaker cover missing. Bulbs not working in the dash binnacle. The roof lining resembles a Bedouin tent. But you know what? It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to Nigel. He's comfortable being how he is. And it shouldn't matter to us, because that's just not what the concept of Nigel is about. It's not about perfection throughout. In fact, I know that Mustard has deliberately kept this car imperfect and plans to continue to do so, because he wants Project Nigel to be a project without end. So, what's my conclusion? Well, in case it wasn't clear, I love Nigel. He's been a part of my life now for over a year, and I'm very glad about that. And above all, Nigel is a reflection of his owner, a man who has become my best friend and business partner. One of the things that I find remarkable about the car is that the attention to detail on the outside isn't replicated on the inside, as I showed you. And I think that reflects on Paul, or Captain Mustard's, humbleness, that the exterior of the car is for other people, and that's important to him, whereas the interior is where he is and what he sees. And you could argue that he sees that as being less important. But at the end of the day, or rather the end of the night, I think I should ask myself 2 questions. 1, would I like to own Nigel? Well, no. He's not a reflection of me. Of course, he was never supposed to be. And the other question is, am I glad that Nigel exists? And that's an easy answer. Oh yeah. The world's a better place with Nigel in it.
Boats would like to express his heartfelt appreciation to his amazing channel members. Alan Searle, Project MGTF, Rosé Chicks, Chef Daniel, The Greenwood, Typhoon Cat, Richard Mahon, Dinosaur Dad, Car Crazy Norwegian, Tricia Alderman, Mickey Jeffries, Jimmy Quinn, Neil Gibbon, Classic Willswall, Joe Cox, John Moruzzi and the Fabulous Psychonaut 7. Your support means the world to him, you're all fucking legends and he thanks you from the heart of his bottom. Thanks also to everyone who supported the channel in other ways with super chat, super thanks or just by watching the videos and leaving your knob alone when the advert come on. See you on the next video. Oh, and I'm not wearing any panties.